A strange man roamed the Connecticut and New York countryside in the 1800s. Who was he and why? How did he become a wanderer? Join me as I dive into the legends and mysteries surrounding the mysterious Leatherman. It was a bitterly cold winter's day in 1883 when an odd sight passed through the sleepy village of Greenwich, Connecticut. Wrapped head to toe in a crude patchwork suit of thick leather, a man shuffled along the frozen ground with a purpose. He walked silently, his eyes fixed forward, never stopping to chat, only offering the faintest acknowledgments when someone crossed his path. Despite his enigmatic nature, the Leatherman's physical appearance was well documented. He stood around 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a lean build and a peculiar gait. His leather attire was worn and weathered, suggesting a life of rugged outdoor living. But what drove this man to live such an unusual life? He was allegedly born in 1839 and lived until 1889. He was known for wearing handmade leather clothes weighing over 60 pounds. Between 1857 and 1889, he traveled between the Hudson and Connecticut rivers. Little was known about the man, and he didn't offer any clues, although he is thought to be French-Canadian or possibly French. The locals knew him simply as the Leatherman. He had been appearing and disappearing along a well-worn path that stretched from the Connecticut River to the Hudson Valley of New York for nearly a decade. With no known name, no family, and no fixed home, the Leatherman roamed the countryside, becoming a living ghost to those who glimpsed him. Who was this mysterious figure, and why did he choose such a life? The first sightings of the Leatherman began around 1858, though the exact time remains uncertain. In the small, tight-knit communities of Connecticut and New York, his appearance caused more curiosity than alarm. Dressed entirely in leather, an outfit rumored to weigh nearly 60 pounds, he walked an almost ritualistic 365-mile loop through New England, often completing it in exactly 34 days. He faithfully adhered to this route so farmers and townsfolk could predict his arrival nearly to the hour. What was most peculiar wasn't just his garb, silence, or long, steady journeys, but the fact that he seemed to reject all elements of conventional society. He never slept in homes, though he was often offered shelter. Instead, the Leatherman found solace along his route in caves and makeshift stone shelters. When hunger struck, he would enter towns and accept food handouts, never begging but never refusing either. In return, he would nod appreciatively before returning to his silent, methodical journey. The villagers, intrigued by this enigmatic figure, began speculating about his origins. Some said he was a Frenchman, and others believed he was a former sailor, lost in his thoughts and life. Still, others whispered that he had suffered a tragic heartbreak that drove him to wander, seeking solace in the lonely wilderness, or a slave who fled the tyranny of slavery. The most extreme theories were that he was a spy or a mystic endowed with supernatural powers. But the Leatherman never spoke of his past, nor did he ever reveal the details of his journey. One persistent rumor claimed that his name was Jules Bourglet, a French leather worker who had come to America after financial ruin and personal disaster. According to this legend, Jules had once been a prosperous man engaged to a wealthy woman, but when his business failed and he could no longer afford the marriage, his life took a sharp turn for the worse. But these stories, like many that emerged, could never be verified. Over time, the myth of the Leatherman grew as locals added their own interpretations of his past, each with more embellishment than the last. His leather outfit, hand-stitched from discarded boots and old bags, only added to his mystique. It was practical protection from the elements, but it also symbolized a man who had cut himself off from society, both physically and emotionally. Despite his refusal to engage in conversation, the Leatherman became a local celebrity. His path took him through bustling towns, over steep hills, and into the dense forests of New England. He followed the seasons, appearing more frequently in certain towns during the colder months, where he would receive food and even new leather pieces from kind-hearted residents. The residents would prepare bread, coffee, crackers, brandy, and meat for him, setting it aside when they knew he was due to pass through. They would speak of his courteous demeanor and peculiar habit of eating alone under the shade of a tree. His unchanging route made him predictable, but it also made him vulnerable. He lived in crude rock shelters and survived many harsh winters by building fires to keep him warm. But in 1888, the Leatherman had a severe brush with death. That winter was fierce, with frigid winds and heavy snowfalls battering the New England countryside. Some locals noticed that the Leatherman had started to show signs of physical decline. His once formidable gait had become slower. His shoulders stooped, and his face weathered and hollowed from years spent outdoors. By now, he had become a cherished figure, and concern for his well-being grew. One day, after several weeks of no sightings, rumors circulated that he had fallen ill. Farmers reported finding his familiar resting spots empty, and some feared the worst. Searches were conducted along his usual route, and eventually he was found in a cave, dangerously ill from frostbite and malnutrition. The authorities intervened and brought him to a hospital, where he was treated for his ailments. The Leatherman was forced to break his solitary routine for the first time in years. There was talk of committing him to an asylum for his own safety. Still, he soon escaped the confines of the hospital and resumed his journey once more. It seemed that nothing, not even death's door, could prevent him from completing his self-imposed pilgrimage. Despite surviving the brutal winter of 1888, the Leatherman's health declined in the following years. By 1889, his journey became more difficult, his pace slower, and the once predictably timed appearances grew more erratic. Locals began to fear that his long, silent journey was ending. In March 1889, the Leatherman's body was discovered in a cave near Ossining, New York. He had died peacefully, in the same way he had lived, alone, surrounded by the wilderness that had become his home. At the time of his death, authorities estimated that he was in his early 50s, though no one could say for sure. He was buried in the Sparta Cemetery in Ossining under a gravestone that read, "The Leatherman." No one knew his real name, and there were no relatives to claim his body. He was interred as a legend, losing his true identity to time. Attempts to unravel the mystery of the Leatherman's origins continue today. In 2011, his grave in Ossining was exhumed in the hope of conducting DNA tests that might reveal more about his identity. However, the excavation revealed that his remains had been moved, and little could be gleaned from the disturbed site. The question of who the Leatherman was remains unanswered, and it seems destined to remain one of New England's most enduring mysteries. So what do you think about the Leatherman's story? Do you believe he was a spy, a mystic, or a man looking for solace in the wilderness? Share your thoughts in the comments below and check out our other videos. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more. Until next time, farewell.